On the night of October 15, 2024, in the community of D.e.a.t.h.s, a peaceful residential area within St. Landry Parish, Louisiana, the stillness of the night was shattered by a frantic, terrified scream. An anguished cry echoed through the small lane as someone shouted that the Martin house was on fire and pleaded for help. The neighborhood residents, some deep in sleep, others still awake watching a late-night movie, were jolted awake. They rushed out into the street and were immediately confronted with a horrifying scene. A blazing inferno, like a giant, roaring monster, was devouring the sturdy, two-story home of the Martin family, one of the most well-off and gentle families in the area. Orange tongues of flame licked through the windows, billowing furiously. In the blink of an eye, a colossal column of thick, black smoke coiled into the sky, obscuring the night and carrying the acrid smell of burning wood, melting plastic, and countless other household items being incinerated. Occasionally, sharp, crackling pops rang out as the metal roofing was heated to its limit. The chaotic scene was punctuated by the sounds of shouting, of people wailing the names of those inside, and the clanging of buckets as neighbors tried in vain to fight the blaze. The fire's tremendous heat made it impossible for anyone to get close. 15 minutes later, blaring sirens tore through the night. 3 fire engines from the parish fire department raced toward the sea of flames. Firefighting efforts began immediately. Dozens of firefighters in specialized protective gear bravely charged into battle with the blaze. Powerful hoses blasted water at the fire from multiple directions. Dozens of young men from the community also rushed in to help, some pulling hoses, others trying to break down walls to create an escape route. But the fire was too ferocious. It seemed something had fueled it, causing it to erupt with unnatural and intense violence. It was not until nearly 3 a.m., after almost 3 hours of relentless struggle, that the fire was finally brought under control. As the black smoke gradually dissipated, a scene of desolate tragedy was revealed. The entire house was reduced to a blackened concrete frame, the metal roof had completely collapsed, and every valuable possession inside had turned to ash. A suffocating, burnt odor, mixed with the ghastly smell of death, hung in the air. When the firefighters were finally able to enter the smoldering ruins, the worst fears of everyone present were confirmed. In a first-floor bedroom, they discovered 2 bodies, burned black and contorted, no longer recognizable. Based on their location and what little remained, they were presumed to be David Martin, 53, and his wife, Helen Martin, 48. The pain did not stop there. Moving to the 2nd floor, they found 2 more bodies in another bedroom. The 2 smaller figures were identified as the Martins' daughters, Jessica Martin, 19, and Emily Martin, 17. The entire family of 4 no one had survived. The horrific news immediately sent shockwaves through the rural community. The people of D.e.a.t.h.s could not believe their ears. The Martin family was known for being kind and living in harmony with their neighbors, with no known enemies. Their 2 daughters were beautiful, well-behaved, and excellent students. No one could imagine how such a devastating tragedy could befall them. That same morning, recognizing the extreme severity of the case, the leadership of the St. Landry Parish Sheriff's Office, led by Sheriff John Miller himself and the head of the Criminal Investigation Division, Captain Robert Dubois, arrived at the scene to personally direct the investigation. A special task force, designated 5H, was formed on the spot. The preliminary report from the fire department immediately raised a huge red flag. A fire marshal reported to the sheriff that, based on their experience, there were many unusual things about this fire. The fire had spread far too quickly and burned at an incredibly high temperature, unlike a typical fire caused by an electrical short or a household accident. There was a high probability, he concluded, that an accelerant had been used. This assessment was quickly corroborated by the forensic team. While conducting a preliminary examination of the scene, they discovered undeniable evidence of a homicide. First, at the main entrance of the house, although the lock had been warped by the intense heat, the remaining marks showed that it had been locked from the outside with a key before the fire broke out. This meant that in their final, desperate moments, the entire Martin family had been trapped inside by the perpetrator, cutting off all means of escape. Second, a rapid analysis of the front porch area and the base of the wooden staircase leading to the 2nd floor confirmed the presence of gasoline residue. The acrid smell of gasoline still lingered in the air, despite being partially masked by smoke and water. The perpetrator had clearly poured gasoline from the outside in, and also onto the staircase, creating a wall of fire to block any escape from the upper floor. And finally, near the back fence, About 20 yards from the house, the team found a melted, deformed 2.5-gallon plastic gas can. Though burned, the strong smell of gasoline still emanated from inside. All the physical evidence pointed to one cold, hard conclusion. This was not an accidental fire. This was an arson murder, planned and executed with meticulous and cruel precision. The killer did not just want to kill one person, they wanted to burn an entire family alive, giving them absolutely no chance of survival. Captain Robert Dubois stood amidst the devastation, his face grim, a sense of outrage welling up inside the seasoned commander. This crime had crossed every line of humanity. A huge, haunting question was posed to the task force. Who could be so ruthless? What motive could drive a person to such a level of depravity? The investigation began, with the immense pressure to find the ghost-like perpetrator weighing heavily on the shoulders of the detectives. The forensic examination of the horrific fire scene at A.r.s.o.n lasted for 2 full days and nights. Every charred fragment, every burnt object was carefully collected, numbered, and sealed by the forensics team, hoping to find even the smallest clue the killer might have left behind. The 4 bodies of the Martin family, after a preliminary on-site examination, were transported to the State Forensic Lab for autopsies. Meanwhile, at the task force headquarters, Captain Dubois and his investigators were under extreme pressure. A mass murder of an entire family by arson was a crime of extraordinary severity, causing extreme panic among the public. The orders from the sheriff were clear: solve this case as quickly as possible. A monster this depraved could not be allowed to roam free. A few days later, the first scientific results came back, reinforcing the initial findings and painting an even clearer picture of the killer's brutality. The autopsy report confirmed that all 4 victims had died before their bodies were completely consumed by the flames. The primary cause of death was asphyxiation from carbon monoxide and other toxic gases produced by the fire. This proved that at the moment the fire erupted, the entire Martin family was still alive, likely fast asleep. They had endured their final moments in absolute terror and desperation, trapped in a sea of fire with no way out. The forensic lab report also definitively confirmed that the accelerant used was regular unleaded gasoline. Based on the burn patterns and traces left behind, experts reconstructed the killer's path of fire. He had poured the gasoline in an arc surrounding the main door, then dumped the rest at the base of the wooden staircase, creating a perfect fire trap that both prevented those inside from getting out and blocked the escape route from the 2nd floor down. Analysis of the melted door lock also showed it had been locked from the outside, with no signs of being forced. All the evidence coldly pointed to one truth: this was a meticulously planned murder with the sole purpose of killing the entire family, leaving no one behind. With these scientific conclusions in hand, the task force launched its first investigative avenues, focusing on the relationships of the head of the family, David Martin. In a case briefing, Captain Dubois analyzed that Mr. Martin was the owner of a large lumber mill and one of the wealthiest men in the community. He noted that in business, conflicts are unavoidable. He therefore directed that their first line of inquiry would be to focus on Mr. Martin's business dealings, especially any debts and relationships with his employees. A special team was assigned to review all of David Martin's books, documents, and bank transactions. They quickly discovered that despite his success, Mr. Martin had several large, overdue debts to his lumber suppliers, totaling nearly $25,000. Text messages showed that a few of these partners had been quite aggressive, even making threats. One of them, Frank Costello, a lumber supplier from another parish, was immediately designated as the #1 suspect. Mr. Costello was brought in for questioning. Initially, he seemed genuinely shocked by the deaths of the Martin family. But when detectives asked about the $15,000 debt, his attitude hardened. Costello admitted that Martin owed him money. He confessed that he had called him plenty of times about it, had gotten angry, and had said some harsh things. But he insisted that was just business. He claimed he was trying to scare Martin into paying him, not to do something as despicable as killing his whole family. He rhetorically asked who would pay him back if he killed his debtor. Costello's story seemed logical, and more importantly, he provided an airtight alibi. On the night of the fire, he was at his home, over 60 miles away, with numerous witnesses to confirm it. The investigation into the business partners gradually hit a dead end. The second line of inquiry focused on the nearly 20 employees at Martin's lumber mill. Detectives interviewed each one. They all said that David Martin was a good boss though strict at times, He treated his workers fairly and was never late on payroll or had any major conflicts. All of the employees were vetted and had clear alibis for the night of the fire. The initial, most logical avenues of investigation had all led to dead ends. The killer did not seem to be a business rival or a disgruntled employee. Detectives continued to expand their scope, looking into minor neighborhood squabbles and local individuals with criminal records, but nothing promising turned up. Nearly a month had passed since the day of the fire. Pressure from the public and from superiors was mounting on the task force. The killer remained a ghost, having left behind no discernible trail. Stagnation hung heavy in Captain Dubois' office. One late evening, while reviewing the entire case file alone, he paused on the profiles of the two youngest victims, Jessica and Emily Martin. He suddenly realized that from the very beginning, they had been too focused on the relationships of the father, the head of the family, and had almost completely overlooked an angle that could hold unexpected clues: the emotional lives and personal relationships of the two teenage daughters. In the modern world, young people have complex relationships, hidden conflicts that adults are often completely unaware of. A romantic dispute, a blind jealousy of youth, can sometimes lead to consequences more horrific than any financial disagreement. An idea flashed in the commander's mind. What if they had been on the wrong track from the start? What if the killer's target was not David Martin, but another member of the family? The next morning, Captain Dubois called an emergency meeting. He addressed his team with a resolute voice, stating that all of their investigations into the relationships of Mr. and Mrs. Martin had led nowhere. He had decided they would temporarily shelve this approach. Starting tomorrow, he announced, the entire force of the task force would focus on a new line of inquiry, one they had inadvertently overlooked. He paused, then revealed that the new line of inquiry was the social circles, friendships, and especially the romantic relationships of the two daughters. He wanted all data from their phones recovered, their call logs, text messages, and social media accounts. He instructed his team to find and talk to every single one of their close friends, explaining that he had a gut feeling the key to this case was right there. Captain Dubois' order breathed new life into the stalled investigation. The entire task force immediately changed direction. Now, all focus was on reconstructing the lives of the two young victims, Jessica and Emily Martin. The first and most critical task was assigned to the Cybercrimes Unit. Their mission was to recover all data from the electronic devices destroyed in the fire. The two cell phones belonging to the sisters were found as nothing more than blackened, melted lumps of plastic, seemingly beyond salvage. However, using specialized equipment and software, the cybercrime experts began a task that required extraordinary patience and precision. They carefully separated the motherboards and memory chips from the child casings, and then initiated complex technical procedures to read the data directly from the chips. At the same time, they sent requests to social media companies and cloud storage services the victims used, asking for complete backups of their data. After days of relentless work, their efforts paid off. A large portion of the data, including thousands of text messages, call logs, and social media posts, was successfully recovered. The investigators then began the even more daunting task of sifting through and analyzing this ocean of information. The personal life of the older sister, Jessica Martin, 19, was quite simple. She was a diligent college student with few friends, and her social life was uncomplicated. But when they analyzed the data of the younger sister, Emily Martin, 17, a completely different picture emerged. Emily had a much more complex inner life and set of relationships. And amidst thousands of conversations, one name began to appear with unusual frequency: Kyle Bro. Through the text messages, investigators pieced together a secret love story. Emily and a young man named Kyle Bro, 21, from a neighboring town, had been in a relationship for nearly 2 years. Their love appeared passionate but also stormy, with messages of anger and jealousy interspersed with sweet words of affection. Most importantly, the messages revealed that the relationship was fiercely opposed by Emily's family, especially her father, David. Mr. Martin believed Kyle was a troublemaker, unworthy of his daughter, and had repeatedly forbidden them from seeing each other. Meanwhile, the field detectives also brought back invaluable information. They had managed to find and speak with Emily's closest friends. At first, the girls were scared, but after being gently encouraged by the investigators, they told the whole story. One of her best friends recounted that it was true Kyle was Emily's boyfriend, but Mr. and Mrs. Martin hated him. Mr. Martin had said he had no future and was just a delinquent, so he forbade Emily from seeing Kyle anymore. The friend added that Emily and her parents fought about it all the time. This friend then provided a critically important detail. She revealed that about a week before the fire, Emily had finally decided to break up with Kyle. All her friends had been telling her to, because Kyle had a really bad temper and got jealous easily. That day, Kyle had cornered Emily right at the school gate and they had a huge fight. He had even threatened her. The friend recalled him saying that if she dared to leave him, he would not let her family live in peace. This testimony became the crucial link that transformed Kyle Bro from a nameless figure in thousands of text messages into a potential suspect with a clear motive. The task force immediately began building a detailed profile on him. What they found only strengthened their suspicions. Kyle Bro, 21, was a high school dropout with no steady job, known throughout the area as a troublemaker who hung out with a bad crowd and had an extremely volatile, aggressive temper. His record at the local sheriff's substation noted he had been fined several times for disorderly conduct and misdemeanor assault. Kyle's neighbors also confirmed that he was sullen and abrasive, and had often been heard making hostile remarks and threats toward Emily's family after they forbade him from seeing her. The motive was there. The suspect's profile was becoming clear. But to charge him, they needed proof that Kyle was at the scene on the night of the fire. The case had taken a huge leap forward, but the biggest challenge still lay ahead. In the task force's briefing room, the atmosphere was no longer one of gloom but of intense focus and determination. Captain Dubois stood before a map of the area, on which the locations of the victim's house and Kyle Bro's house were marked. He announced that they had their number one suspect. Now, he said, their job was to find the physical evidence to lock this subject down. He had a feeling Kyle could not have moved around that night without leaving some kind of trace. He turned to the lead field detective and ordered a full canvass, effective immediately, of every security camera on every road that could possibly connect Kyle Bro's house to the victim's house, between the hours of 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. on the night of the fire. He instructed them to review every second and not to miss a single suspicious vehicle or person. He wanted to know where Kyle Bro was and what he was doing that night. Captain Dubois' order kicked off a silent but fierce manhunt. Dozens of the most experienced detectives were divided into teams and began the meticulous work of reviewing and extracting data from every security camera system from homes, businesses, and public buildings on all possible routes between Kyle's home and the Martin family residence. It was a monumental task. They had to watch hundreds of hours of footage from dozens of different cameras covering the 3-hour window of that fateful night. Every figure, every motorcycle that passed by was carefully analyzed and cross-referenced. After 2 days of nearly sleepless work, their efforts began to pay off. On a security camera from a construction supply store located on the main road, about 500 yards from the victim's house, detectives spotted something invaluable. At 11:47 p.m., an old, blue dirt bike with the front fender missing sped past. Although the image was somewhat blurry due to the darkness and the camera's quality, forensic experts were still able to identify some key features. The rider was a slender young man wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled down low, obscuring most of his face. The bike was a perfect match for the description of the one Kyle Bro usually rode. This clue energized the entire team. They continued to trace the bike's path, and then, on another camera from a residence on a hidden corner closer to the Martin house, they found the decisive image. At 11:55 p.m., that same dirt bike stopped under a large tree just 50 yards from the victim's gate. The young man turned off the engine, looked around several times, and then quietly walked the bike into a dark, dead-end alley. He stayed there for about 25 minutes. At 12:20 a.m., the camera recorded him hastily wheeling the bike back out, starting it, and speeding away just minutes before the first neighbors discovered the fire. With these images in hand, investigators returned to the witness who had heard strange noises. When shown the footage and the description of the bike, he became more certain. He confirmed that was the sound of that kind of engine, and that the metallic clanging he had heard could have been the sound of the iron gate being locked. The picture of the killer's movements on the night of the crime was nearly complete. But to secure a conviction, they needed one more piece of physical evidence, something that could directly link Kyle to the act of arson. Captain Dubois reasoned that to start such a large fire so quickly, the killer must have used a significant amount of gasoline, and it was unlikely he had a large can of it at home. He probably bought it at a gas station on his way. A new, even larger canvass was conducted, this time of all gas stations within a 10-mile radius of the area. And luck smiled on them once more. At a small, privately owned gas station on a back road that Kyle might have taken, detectives extracted the camera footage. An image as clear as day appeared. At 11:10 p.m. on October 15th, Kyle Bro himself, on his blue dirt bike, pulled into the station. He did not fill up his bike's tank. Instead, he asked the attendant to pump exactly 2.5 gallons of gasoline into a white plastic can he had brought with him. The entire scene, Kyle's face, his bike, and the gas can was captured in sharp detail by the station's high-definition security camera. This was the steel-clad evidence, the undeniable, fatal blow. The plastic can was a perfect match for the melted fragments found at the crime scene. All the clues from the testimony of the victim's friends about the romantic conflict to the objective camera footage all pointed to a single name, Kyle Bro. The task force now had enough evidence to proceed. On the afternoon of October 22nd, after more than 2 months of relentless investigation, an arrest warrant for Kyle Bro was approved by the district attorney's office. Multiple surveillance teams were deployed to locate him. He was not at home. After some inquiries, detectives learned that Kyle was at a cafe in the next town, playing poker for money with a group of friends. The arrest plan was executed immediately. When the plainclothes detectives stormed in, the poker game descended into chaos. When Kyle Bro saw the officers, his face paled for a moment, but he quickly feigned calmness, assuming he was just being busted for gambling. He had no idea that the horrific crime he had committed 2 months prior had been exposed. An officer informed Kyle Bro that he was under arrest for murder. Hearing the word murder, Kyle's face froze. The smug smile on his lips vanished, replaced by an unconcealable panic. He was handcuffed and led to a car, leaving his gambling buddies in stunned silence. He was taken to the St. Landry Parish Sheriff's Office interrogation room, defiant, completely unaware that outside, investigators had reels of video and sharp photograph steel-clad evidence that was about to shatter his every lie. In the cold interrogation room, Kyle Bro sat with his legs crossed, an air of arrogant indifference. He looked at Captain Dubois and the other investigators with a defiant stare, as if being brought here was just an annoying inconvenience. Without waiting to be asked, Kyle began by stating that he had already provided his alibi. That night, he claimed, he was at his best friend's house in the next town. He said they were playing poker from 8 p.m. until 2 a.m. and that there were other guys there who could back him up. He told the officers they could go ask them, insisting he had nothing to do with the fire at Emily's house. He presented what seemed like a solid alibi, complete with witnesses. He believed that as long as his friends did not betray him, the police could do nothing. Captain Dubois was unfazed by Kyle's confidence. He silently signaled for an officer to turn on a projector. Captain Dubois calmly said that before they went to talk to his friends, he would like Kyle to watch a few videos. The projector screen lit up. The first video, recorded at 11:55 p.m., showed a blue dirt bike stopping in a hidden corner about 50 yards from the victim's house. Captain Dubois asked if the bike and the person looked familiar. Kyle squinted and scoffed, retorting that there were a million bikes that looked like his and plenty of people who looked like him. He asked if they were going to charge him based on that grainy picture. Captain Dubois nodded and agreed that was fair enough, suggesting they watch a clearer video. The screen switched to another clip. This time, the image was perfectly sharp. It was the footage from the gas station. On the screen, Kyle Bro's face was clearly visible. He was asking the attendant to pump 2.5 gallons of gas into a white plastic can. The timestamp read 11:10 p.m., October 15th. The smirk froze on Kyle's lips. The color drained from his face. His confidence vanished, replaced by unconcealable panic. He never imagined that his preparation of the murder weapon had been so clearly recorded. He stammered, attempting to explain that he was just buying gas for his dad's lawnmower. Captain Dubois raised an eyebrow and questioned the lawnmower story. He asked if Kyle bought gas for a lawnmower at over 11 o'clock at night, then drove nearly 10 miles to get near his ex-girlfriend's house, only to stop there for 25 minutes before turning back. He asked Kyle if that explanation sounded reasonable to him. The decisive psychological blow was delivered. Another investigator placed a file on the table printouts of screenshots of text messages. Captain Dubois said, his voice hardening, that this was what Kyle had sent to the victim 1 week before the fire. He then read one of the messages aloud, quoting Kyle's own words. If she dared to leave him, he would not let her live in peace. He would burn her whole house down so she would know what real pain felt like. He then asked Kyle if he would like to explain this threat. Hearing his own hateful words read back to him, Kyle Bro completely fell apart. The evidence was overwhelming: motive, preparation, and presence at the scene. Every avenue of denial was now closed. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. The act of the innocent bystander was over. After a long silence, he lifted his head. There was no remorse in his eyes, only a simmering, crazed resentment. He growled that he did it. He claimed it was all because of Emily and her family. They had pushed him to it and deserved to die. And then, like a broken dam, Kyle Bro confessed to everything. His statement was a damning indictment of a blind, selfish love and a hatred that had been pushed to the absolute limit. He and Emily had been in love for nearly 2 years. In Kyle's world, as a failure looked down upon by society, Emily was the only precious thing he had. He loved her with a sick, frantic obsession, a love that was more about possession than affection. When her family found out and did everything they could to stop it, to humiliate him, his young man's pride was severely wounded. And when Emily herself, under pressure from her family, decided to break up with him, Kyle felt like his whole world was collapsing. He felt betrayed, thrown away. Kyle screamed in the interrogation room that he gave her everything. And just because of what her parents said, she had thrown him away like trash. He rationalized that if he could not have her, no one could. If she wanted her family more than him, then he would let her whole family go with her. Desperation quickly turned to hatred. A deranged plan for revenge began to form in his mind. On the night of October 15th, after drinking alone to build up his courage, he executed his plan. He took his dirt bike, a gas can, and went to the gas station. After buying the fuel, he drove straight to the Martin house. He waited in a dark corner nearby, watching until all the lights in the house went out. Around midnight, he crept toward the house. He used a small piece of wire he had prepared to slip through the gate and lock it from the outside. He then recounted coldly how he poured the gas. He poured it all over the front door, the walls, and the bottom of the staircase. Then he took out a cigarette and lit it. He smoked half of it and then flicked the burning cigarette into the puddle of gasoline. The fire went up instantly. He just watched for a moment, then got on his bike and left. An investigator asked if he knew there were 4 people in that house. Kyle replied, his voice unwavering, that he knew. He wanted them all to die. All of them, so Emily would pay for daring to betray him. The barbaric confession was over. The investigators looked at the 21-year-old in front of them with a sense of revulsion and a cold chill. For a failed romance, for a wounded ego, he had ruthlessly burned 4 people alive, including the very girl he claimed to have loved most. His confession was fully recorded and signed. The case, for all intents and purposes, was solved. The next step was the crime scene reenactment to solidify the case file before moving to prosecution. A few days later, a crime scene reenactment was conducted. Under the strict supervision of law enforcement and the enraged gaze of local residents, Kyle had to recreate his entire criminal act, from buying the gasoline and locking the victim's gate to the cruel act of setting the fire. Every detail matched his confession and the evidence collected, creating an airtight case file. After completing the final investigative report, the St. Landry Parish Sheriff's Office transferred the entire file to the District Attorney's Office, recommending that the defendant, Kyle Bro, be prosecuted for 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of aggravated arson. The story of the tragic fire at Bayou Oaks caused a major shockwave in public opinion, becoming one of the most followed cases of 2024. It raised an alarming and painful warning about a segment of youth with deviant, selfish lifestyles, who are willing to use extreme violence to resolve emotional conflicts. For the officers of the task force, the outcome for Kyle Bro was a foregone conclusion. For the act of murdering 4 people including a minor, Emily Martin using a cruel and premeditated method, his crime was unforgivable. The death penalty was certainly the only just and fitting end awaiting him at his upcoming trial. That sentence would be the punishment of the law, but it could never compensate for the immense pain and loss his crime had caused. It left behind a horrifying and haunting lesson for the entire community about a blind love that turned into hatred, about the selfishness and cruelty that can hide behind a young face, and about the terrible consequences when conflicts are solved not with reason, but with violence.